The most terrifying form of cruelty does not echo through blood-soaked battlefields in the deafening, visceral roars of wild beasts. No, it is far more sinister than that. It is the polite, condescending smile of the powerful as they casually crush the fragile bones of the innocent, a silent massacre hidden right beneath the blinding chandeliers of majestic castles. Imagine a place where your very existence is deemed a repulsive sin, simply because you were born without fangs, where the ones meant to protect you are the ones orchestrating your torment. Wolf King Stories warmly welcomes you to a psychological journey that will tear your heart apart before piecing it back together in the most brilliant way imaginable. If you want to uncover the dark, hidden secrets of these magnificent castles and support us in bringing more gripping tales to life, please hit that subscribe button right now to fuel our motivation for future videos. You absolutely will not want to miss how this story unfolds. Now, let us temporarily leave behind the exhausted tropes of savage territorial wars, the cliché legends of blood, tearing claws, and the frenzied madness of the full moon. Instead, we are stepping into a much quieter yet infinitely more profound war in the mortal Tutor and the forgotten children of the Wolf King. Here, the ultimate weapon capable of bringing a mighty dynasty to its knees is not a set of razor-sharp claws, but the sheer, unwavering force of human compassion. We find ourselves in Blackwood. This is not merely a pack, it is an absolute empire. Under the iron-fisted rule of Alpha King Rowan, Blackwood stands as the pinnacle of prosperity and undeniable supreme power. Picture those vast halls paved with gleaming marble, towering walls adorned with ancient battle trophies, and lavish banquets where the air is eternally perfumed with a suffocating blend of sweet lavender and rich, smoked pine. Everything radiates an overwhelming aura of superiority, a grandeur so intoxicating that anyone who dares to step inside is instantly forced to bow their head in trembling awe. Yet, as with the oldest of castles, the brighter the torches blaze in the grand halls, the darker and more sinister the shadows stretch in the forgotten dungeons. The true paradox of the Blackwood world lies precisely within that sickeningly perfect extravagance. Buried deep beneath this flawless facade of wealth is a ruthlessly toxic social hierarchy, meticulously disguised by poetic, noble words like strength, pure blood, and the survival of the fittest. In this twisted reality, the worth of a living, breathing soul is never measured by their virtue, their intellect, or their capacity to love. Instead, it is toxically confined to brute physical force and lethal combat prowess. If you are strong, you are a god. But if you are weak, you are worth less than the dirt clinging to the boots of the elites. It is an empire trapped in the most extreme, horrifying form of social Darwinism, where the culling of the weak does not happen in the unforgiving wild. Tragically, maliciously, it happens right inside the home, enacted by those who dare to call themselves family. The dazzling splendor of Blackwood is nothing but a beautiful, gilded mask, desperately concealing a kingdom whose heart is rapidly rotting away from a complete absence of fundamental goodness. And it is exactly within this cold, dark abyss, reeking of that fake, sickening lavender, that the harrowing tragedy of the forgotten children truly begins. To truly understand the depths of this tragedy, we must look to the one soul who dared to walk into this gilded cage not with a sword, but with a fragile, worn book. His name was Julian, and he was nothing more than a mortal human, a creature composed of breakable bones and easily bruised skin, entirely out of place in a realm of apex predators. I often think about the sheer terror he must have felt crossing that majestic threshold, the heavy wooden doors of Blackwood slamming shut behind him like the jaws of a trap. The Alpha King, in a cruel display of utter mockery, had brought Julian into the pack not out of respect for human intellect, but as a living, breathing insult to his own offspring. The king's logic was sickeningly simple. Since his children were deemed defective, incapable of shifting into wolves, they deserved nothing more than a weak, useless human to prepare them for their inevitable exile. Julian was paraded through those lavish halls, enduring the snarls, the mocking laughter, and the predatory gazes of wolves, who looked at him as if he were a walking meal. But here is what the arrogant beasts of Blackwood failed to realize. True strength does not roar, it observes. Julian did not cower. Behind his wire-rimmed glasses and soft-spoken demeanor lay a mind as sharp as obsidian and a heart vast enough to absorb the cruelty of an entire empire. As a storyteller, what strikes me most about Julian is his profound capacity for defiance. He did not need to bare his teeth to show his bravery. His courage was in his refusal to accept the pack's definition of worth. He saw right through the suffocating lavender scent and the ancient trophies. He saw a society paralyzed by its own toxic masculinity and fear of vulnerability. Julian walked into the den of beasts fully aware that a single misstep could end his life, yet his mind was entirely focused on the innocent lives he was hired to supposedly babysit. He was a man stepping into a freezing abyss, armed only with the warmth of his own empathy, ready to challenge an ancient hierarchy that had reigned unquestioned for centuries. But nothing could have prepared Julian for the heart-wrenching sight that awaited him in the darkest, most neglected wing of the magnificent estate. There, hidden away from the grand banquets and the triumphant howls, were the forgotten children of the Wolf King, Elias and Elara. When I think about these two frail figures, huddled together in a drafty, stone-cold room that felt more like a prison cell than a royal chamber, my heart physically aches. These were not monsters, they were children. Yet, in the eyes of their father, they were a vile stain on his immaculate legacy simply because their wolves had never awakened. They were labeled as runts, a derogatory term spat out like venom by the very people who should have been tucking them into bed. Elias, barely 10 years old, had a permanent flinch, his nervous system so utterly shattered by years of sudden, violent reprimands that he apologized for merely breathing too loudly. Elara, older by 2 years, possessed a quiet, devastating sorrow in her eyes, a hollow resignation that no child should ever have to harbor. They had been starved of affection, isolated from their peers, and repeatedly told that their existence was an embarrassing mistake. Julian did not see defects when he looked at them. He saw two brilliantly beautiful, shattered souls, desperately crying out for a sliver of kindness. The sheer injustice of it is enough to make anyone's blood boil. Imagine being a child, looking up at the towering figures of your parents, only to find disgust where love should naturally reside. Julian immediately discarded the king's derisive curriculum. He did not treat them as outcasts to be pitied. He treated them as human beings worthy of absolute respect. He knelt to their eye level, a simple, deeply profound gesture of equality that terrified the children at first, for they had never known anything but the heavy boot of superiority. In that freezing, forgotten room, amidst the dust and the echoing silence of neglect, Julian began to stitch their shattered innocence back together. He became the father they never had, proving that bloodlines and genetics are meaningless when compared to the chosen bonds of genuine, unwavering care. Thus began a quiet, desperate rebellion forged not with bared fangs, but with whispered stories and the turning of fragile pages. Julian knew that to save Elias and Elara, he could not teach them to fight on the pack's terms. Attempting to make them physical warriors would only lead to their slaughter. Instead, he chose to arm them with the most dangerous weapons in existence: critical thought, historical wisdom, and a deep, unshakable sense of self-worth. It is incredibly moving to envision those clandestine lessons in the dead of night. While the rest of the empire celebrated their bloody victories, Julian was teaching the children about the rise and fall of ancient human empires, about philosophy, strategy, and the mechanics of the world far beyond the Blackwood borders. He taught them that a mind capable of foresight and diplomacy could easily outmaneuver a beast running purely on instinct. Slowly, miraculously, the children began to change. Elias stopped flinching when the doors opened, his eyes replacing fear with a sharp, calculating curiosity. Elara's hollow sorrow transformed into a quiet, dignified confidence. They were no longer the pathetic runts of the litter. They were scholars, strategists, and thinkers. What moves me deeply about this transformation is the profound intimacy of their growing bond. Julian wasn't just feeding them information, He was validating their existence. He taught them that their lack of a wolf was not a curse, but a liberation from the mindless, savage cycle of violence that plagued their ancestors. This quiet revolt did not go unnoticed. The Alpha King and his elite warriors would occasionally sneer at the trio, mocking the human and his pathetic disciples. They laughed at the books and the quiet conversations, completely blinded by their own arrogance. They could not comprehend that right under their noses, a revolution was brewing. The pack believed power only existed in the physical crushing of a throat, failing utterly to realize that true, enduring power lies in the unbreakable resilience of an awakened mind. Yet, in an empire built on the fragile foundation of tyranny, a shift in the wind is all it takes to bring the mighty crashing down. The climax of this harrowing journey did not arrive with a dramatic clash of armies or a blood-soaked arena, but rather in a moment of catastrophic political failure for the Blackwood pack. A severe, devastating winter famine struck, coupled with a strategic blockade from a coalition of rival packs who had grown weary of Blackwood's arrogance. Alpha King Rowan, for all his monstrous physical strength and terrifying roars, was entirely paralyzed. You cannot bite starvation. You cannot claw your way out of a complex economic and strategic siege. As the glorious empire began to fracture, panic setting into the eyes of the once proud warriors, it was not a mighty wolf who stepped forward to save them. It was Elias and Elara. Utilizing the intricate maps, the human diplomatic strategies, and the resource management skills Julian had painstakingly taught them, the defective children mapped out a flawless survival and negotiation strategy. I want you to truly picture that moment, the grand, marble-paved hall, once a place of terrifying judgment for the children, now silent as the mighty Alpha King was forced to listen to his rejected, wolfless offspring. They didn't gloat, they didn't scream for vengeance. With a chilling, elegant calmness, they presented the solution that would save the very people who had tortured them. It was the ultimate, humiliating defeat for the social Darwinism that had poisoned Blackwood. The king's toxic ideology crumbled to dust before his very eyes, shattered by the sheer brilliance of the minds he had deemed worthless. In the end, it was not the beast that prevailed, but the humanity within them. Julian's legacy was not written in the blood of his enemies, but in the survival of an entire generation that finally learned to value compassion over cruelty. The mortal Tutor, a fragile man in a den of monsters, had successfully conquered the most terrifying empire on Earth simply by daring to love the unlovable. This story leaves us with a profound, lingering truth that echoes long after the telling is done. The most invincible armor one can ever possess is a nurtured mind, and the most lethal weapon against a world of darkness is the radical, unrelenting courage to care. The tale of Julian and the Blackwood pack is a powerful testament to the enduring triumph of the human spirit over deeply ingrained cruelty. Julian, a fragile mortal surrounded by apex predators, achieved what no army or rival alpha could. He dismantled an ancient, toxic hierarchy from within. By choosing empathy over fear, he rescued Elias and Elara from the suffocating darkness of rejection. He did not teach them to mimic the brutal ways of their oppressors, but rather empowered them with the liberating forces of critical thought, historical wisdom, and self-worth. When the mighty empire faced a crisis that could not be solved with fangs and claws, it was these very defective runts who became the saviors of their abusers. This story beautifully illustrates that the most imposing empires and the most terrifying monsters often possess fatal vulnerabilities, blind spots created by their own arrogance. Julian's silent rebellion proves that true strength does not lie in the ability to incite fear or inflict violence, but in the profound capacity to nurture, understand, and strategize. Ultimately, the fall of the Alpha King's ideology was not brought about by a physical defeat, but by the undeniable realization that intellect, compassion, and resilience will always outlast the fleeting dominance of brute force. Julian's legacy is a shining beacon, reminding us that the radical act of loving the unlovable and educating the overlooked can rewrite the fate of an entire society. Profound lesson learned. True power is never defined by physical dominance, loud intimidation, or conforming to a flawed society's definition of strength. It is found in empathy, intellect, and quiet resilience. The most transformative weapon against a cruel system is the radical act of nurturing the mind and valuing intrinsic self-worth over the validation of oppressors. How to apply this to your life? In today's highly competitive and often aggressive world, it is easy to feel inadequate if you do not fit the conventional mold of success or power. When faced with toxic environments, whether in the workplace, school, or social circles, do not exhaust yourself trying to beat bullies at their own game. Instead, cultivate your mind, read deeply, think critically, and hone your unique skills. Lead with compassion, especially toward those who are marginalized or underestimated. When inevitable crises arise, it will be your emotional intelligence, foresight, and strategic thinking that provide the solutions that arrogance and aggression never could. A question for you: have you ever been underestimated by others, and how did you use your unique abilities or intellect to prove them wrong? Please share your stories in the comments section below so we can all learn and draw inspiration from your perspective. If you enjoyed this profound journey and found value in its message, please hit that subscribe button. Your support truly gives us the motivation to keep creating more inspiring and high-quality content for you.